There are moments in MotoGP when the stopwatch stops meaning anything, when a rider ceases to chase time and begins to bend it. That's what Franco Morbidelli saw the day he opened Marquez's telemetry. Numbers that shouldn't exist, angles that no body should survive, precision that felt like sorcery disguised as science. The data didn't describe a man on a bike. It described an organism evolved beyond logic. Every line, every decibel, every fraction of throttle told the same story, a new species of control. Rivals prepare strategies, simulations, and prayers, but none of it matters once the number 93 leaves the box. His Ducati doesn't roar, it calculates. The sensors capture things that engineers can't explain, pressure drops that defy hydraulics, accelerations that flirt with the limits of traction itself. I was scared, Morbidelli admitted, and for once fear wasn't weakness, it was clarity. Because when you see Marquez ride, you understand that talent is no longer the word. What he does is an imitation or instinct. It's a conversation between man and physics where only one side truly speaks. Each corner he enters rewrites what's possible. And deep down, every other rider knows it. You can't race against something that's already beyond racing. You can only watch, hold your breath, and wonder, if Marquez isn't human, then what is he? And it all began the moment Franco Morbidelli opened the telemetry screen and realized he wasn't looking at numbers, but at the anatomy of the impossible. Franco Morbidelli opened the telemetry and for a second forgot to breathe because the lines on the screen didn't look like data but like a confession written in electricity. Each curve of Marc Marquez's lap seemed to whisper something forbidden, an equation that no human should solve. The breaking points came 3/10 earlier than physics would tolerate, the lean angles cut into geometry itself, and the front tire somehow kept its grip when the law of friction should have given up. "This isn't speed," he murmured. "It's another kind of gravity." The room around him fell silent, the engineers leaning closer as if afraid the monitor might explode. In that stillness, Franco felt his heart synchronize with the flicker of the screen, pulse against pulse, man against the impossible. What if I'm staring at the future, and I don't belong to it? He thought, the question biting through the static of his mind. The data showed that Marquez released brake pressure with an average of 3 bars less than any other Ducati, a detail so delicate it seemed almost poetic. The engineers called it margin control, but it felt like telepathy. The line of acceleration rose like a heartbeat refusing to stop, relentless, perfect, terrifying. Outside, engines warmed, but inside that room, another kind of sound filled the air, the hum of disbelief. The numbers climbed and dipped like the notes of a song that only one rider could hear. Every curve was a brushstroke from a painter who used danger as color. Morbidelli blinked, trying to convince himself it was just data, just pixels, but it wasn't. It was anatomy rewritten, instinct electrified. "No one can ride like this," an engineer whispered, yet everyone knew someone could, and his name was already echoing down the pit lane. How do you compete with a man who rides as if the asphalt answers to him? Franco wondered, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles whitened. The telemetry showed no hesitation, no error, not even the ghost of doubt. It wasn't a lap. It was an algorithm carved into motion. And when the screen went dark, the silence that followed felt heavier than applause. The climax arrived like a truth too bright to deny. What Morbidelli had seen wasn't Marquez's data. It was proof that the human limit had already been passed. Franco Morbidelli remembers the moment, as if time itself had slowed down to watch him fail. The sky above Jerez was a mirror of heat, and turn 5 waited like a trap disguised as geometry. He had studied Marquez's telemetry all night, memorized every decimal, convinced that logic could bridge the abyss between them. "If I just match his breaking point," he whispered into his helmet, "maybe the corner will open for me too." The throttle bit, the bike screamed, and for a heartbeat he believed he'd found the key. But the Ducati didn't respond. It resisted, like a wild animal offended by imitation. The front folded with no warning, a betrayal written in dust. "I knew it was coming," he thought as he slid through the gravel, "but I couldn't stop myself." The impact was brief, but the silence that followed lasted forever. His telemetry would later show that he had released the brakes 3/10 too late and leaned 2 degrees too deep, numbers so small, yet fatal. Engineers call it overload convergence, a phenomenon where balance and chaos switch places in a blink. It sounded clinical, but the truth was violent. In that instant, Morbidelli understood that Marquez didn't calculate, he felt. The Spaniard seemed to converse with the bike in a language no one else spoke, syllables made of throttle and breath. Watching the replay, Franco saw his own fall framed against Marc's perfection, a tragedy of millimeters. The contrast was unbearable, beautiful, cruel. He doesn't ride the corner, he told the journalists later. The corner bends for him. Maybe this is what genius looks like, he thought that night, staring at the bruises spreading across his ribs. The data didn't lie, and neither did the fear that settled in his chest. The climax came not with a crash, but with a realization that imitation had limits. Against Marquez, you don't race, you endure the proof that someone has already rewritten the rules of motion. In the dim light of the Ducati garage, the engineers spoke in half-sentences, their words trembling between science and superstition. The ECU from Marquez's machine had revealed patterns no algorithm could explain, impulses that seemed to predict rather than react. Voltage peaks occurred 40 milliseconds earlier than expected, as if the bike anticipated his will. It's like his bike has a different chip, a different brain, one mechanic murmured, staring at the lines as though they might blink back. The brake pressure graph dipped 3 bars lower than the accepted safe zone, yet stability never faltered. How can flesh keep up with circuitry? Morbidelli wondered, watching the digital ghost of Marquez glide through impossible lean angles. Engineers called it predictive modulation, a rare behavior in ECUs that translates micro-inputs before they're fully registered. It sounded technical, but what they saw felt supernatural. The telemetry curves overlapped like brushstrokes in an abstract painting, chaos ordered by instinct. Marquez didn't tame the data, he composed it, note after note, as if writing were a form of mathematics sung aloud. Each spike on the screen pulsed like a heartbeat too calm to be human. The others tried to simulate it on test benches. None could reproduce the harmony between man and machine. Every lap he teaches the sensors a new language, said a Ducati analyst, shaking his head. Maybe that's his secret, Franco thought. He doesn't learn from the bike learns from him. Even the algorithm seemed humbled, adapting to his rhythm like instruments to a conductor. The air in the garage smelled of oil, ozone, and disbelief. Lines of code scrolled past like scripture from a future no one else had reached. And when the final graph froze, silence fell like a verdict. The climax wasn't in the discovery itself, but in a shiver that ran through the team. Logic had met its limit, and Marquez had crossed it. There are laps that last forever, not because of duration, but because they distort the sense of time itself. When Franco Morbidelli followed Marquez at Jerez, he swore the clocks were lying. Marc braked earlier, leaned longer, and still exited faster, as if chronology itself obeyed his throttle. He seems to know the corner before he enters it, Morbidelli said, his voice half wonder, half defeat. The telemetry confirmed the impossible. Marquez released the lever a full 0.18 seconds before anyone else, yet never lost the front. Computers struggled to process the sequence, the data loops flickering like film burning in a projector. It's as if he bends the second to his will, Franco thought, chasing a ghost that existed slightly ahead of the present. Engineers called it temporal synchronization drift, a phrase too fragile to contain the miracle. Watching him on track was like seeing a sculptor carve air, each movement invisible, yet permanent. His body didn't resist speed. It conversed with it, bending momentum like light through glass. At turn 9, he entered late, exited early, and somehow stayed longer inside the curve, a paradox only time could explain. No one reacts that fast, an analyst whispered. Because he doesn't react, he anticipates. The data files looked broken, but they weren't. They were just written in another tense. Morbidelli realized then that Marquez didn't live in seconds or tenths, but in something finer, a fraction that language hadn't named yet. I'm always arriving after he's already gone, he thought, and the sadness in it was heavier than defeat. Even the wind around Marc's Ducati seemed delayed, chasing him like memory. The stopwatch told one truth, but the eyes told another. He wasn't faster. He was earlier. The pit crew stared at the screen in silence, knowing they were witnessing not a lap but a fracture in time. The climax came quietly, when the numbers aligned and still made no sense. That was the moment everyone understood. Marquez doesn't race in the present. He makes the present race to keep up with him. In the fevered hum of the paddock, the myth of Marquez had shifted from wild prodigy to architect of disorder. The man who once courted risk now commanded it, shaping chaos with the calm precision of a craftsman tracing perfect imperfection. You can prepare for everyone but not for Marc, Morbidelli admitted, his words carrying the quiet tremor of truth that everyone else felt but never dared to say aloud. Each time Marquez rolled onto the track, the air thickened, as if anticipation itself tightened around the pit lane. Engineers stared at his telemetry like cartographers trying to map a moving storm. They found no pattern, only adaptation, curves that changed shape like water poured from one vessel to another. He doesn't follow the track, Franco thought. He persuades it to follow him. What baffled technicians was his capacity to maintain corner entry speed 2.3% above baseline despite micro-instabilities that should have triggered loss of traction. The sensors called it variable harmonics, a phenomenon no simulator could reproduce. For Marquez, every lap was an act of negotiation with the unpredictable. His bike didn't fight turbulence, it sang through it. Watching him, one mechanic muttered, "He rides inside the chaos, not against it." The phrase stuck because it felt more accurate than any technical manual. He transformed risk into rhythm, every slide a controlled heartbeat between disaster and art. The Ducati's rear tire would shimmer under heat, but instead of correcting, he adjusted mid-slide, as if painting balance on the edge of collapse. It was not bravery, but fluency, a language of danger only he could speak. Maybe that's what frightens us most, Morbidelli reflected, that he makes the impossible look stable. Around him, the paddock's noise fell to reverent silence, a collective awe born from fear disguised as admiration. The climax arrived not with speed but with control, Marquez perfectly still inside motion, the eye of a storm that never ends. The old Marquez burned like a meteor, spectacular, brief, and dangerously bright. The new one moves differently, not exploding, but calculating, each gesture stripped of waste. Gone is the kamikaze who gambled with gravity. What remains is a surgeon of velocity, a man who bleeds patience instead of adrenaline. He doesn't rush anymore, said a Ducati engineer, voice low as if confessing. He waits for the perfect fracture and then strikes. The numbers confirm it. His tire wear curve now runs 12% smoother than his teammates, a margin that in MotoGP terms feels like a new law of nature. I used to think speed was chaos, Marquez reflects inwardly, but now I know it's rhythm disguised as danger. He rides with the restraint of someone who has already lived through every possible crash in his mind. Each lap is a chess move disguised as violence. His right wrist no longer twitches with impulse, it listens. Data shows micro-delays of 20 milliseconds before full throttle, an intentional hesitation that turns aggression into control. Onboard cameras reveal the calm of his eyes, calculating, detached, the focus of a sculptor polishing marble already shaped. The bike obeys not through domination but through faith, as if it senses his certainty. Marquez's transformation unsettles the paddock. Even victory feels quieter, almost surgical. He's colder now, Morbidelli admitted, like he's erased everything that made him human except the will to win. That comment hung in the air like frost. They mistake silence for absence, Marquez thinks, but silence is where precision lives. His touch on the brakes is gentle yet final, reducing motion to pure decision. Gone is the roar of risk. In its place, a measured hum that sounds like inevitability. The climax arrives without drama, only realization. The fire didn't die. It learned to freeze, and in the stillness, it became unstoppable. Before the engines scream, before the lights go out, the real race begins inside the skull. Against Marquez, fear no longer hides. It breathes in rhythm with a heartbeat. Ducati's biometric analysis proved it. Every rival's pulse spikes by 6 beats per minute the moment his number flashes on the timing screen. The phenomenon isn't superstition. It's physiology, intimidation measured in flesh. You're not racing against time, Morbidelli confessed. You're racing against the idea that he can always do better. That idea spreads through the grid like static, invisible, but heavy. He's inside all of us before the first corner, Franco thought, the admission bitter as defeat. Even riders who deny it betray themselves in their telemetry. Breakpoints shift, throttle curves tighten, instinct bends to doubt. Psychologists call it anticipatory collapse, a subtle erosion of self-belief caused by repeated exposure to superiority. The term sounds sterile, but the feeling isn't. It's a slow drowning in expectation, the weight of inevitability pressing against every thought. Marquez walks through the paddock and conversations lower by instinct, as if silence could shield the fragile. His presence changes the air, sharpening it, until breathing feels like confession. He infects your confidence, said a team manager, watching riders adjust helmets that suddenly felt too tight. Onboard footage shows the same pattern. Hesitation mid-corner, a flicker of doubt at exit, the mind surrendering a tenth before the bike. Why push when perfection is already taken? Someone mutters under their breath. Even success feels counterfeit when measured beside his ease. Engineers try to rationalize it, but the truth lies elsewhere, in psychology's dark mirror. The abyss isn't ahead, it's behind, whispering that Marquez is already there. The climax lands not in numbers but in silence, the moment a man realizes he's beaten before the race begins. Silverstone, 2025. The circuit breathed its usual violence, cold wind, hard asphalt, and the echo of engines scraping the horizon, but Marquez moved through it like a secret. The telemetry later confirmed the miracle. He braked 0.14 seconds faster and opened the throttle 2 meters earlier than any other Ducati rider. Those aren't numbers, they're coordinates of transcendence. His rivals sweated under the weight of their machines, but he seemed lighter, almost detached, like a shadow perfectly aligned with its source. He's not attacking the circuit anymore, Morbidelli said, voice unsteady. He's conversing with it. Engineers observed his data in silence, tracing curves so fluid they looked handwritten. How can precision feel emotional? One of them thought, staring at graphs that looked like heartbeat and melody at once. The Ducati sensors revealed a 7% gain in front-end stability on surfaces where everyone else lost traction. To the naked eye, he wasn't faster. He was inevitable. Watching him enter copse, it felt like witnessing time bow its head. Every movement was premeditated yet spontaneous, every risk disguised as certainty. I don't see a rider anymore, Franco whispered inwardly. I see an answer. The paddock fell into the hush that only dominance can create. No one could explain why his lines felt alive, bending, breathing. Even the commentators hesitated, afraid to cheapen the sight with language. Marquez didn't ride, he revealed. He turned physics into choreography, the brutal into the beautiful. The climax unfolded not with noise but with awe. What they were chasing was never a man. It was the perfection that had simply chosen him as its temporary form.